Hey, happy Friday. Welcome back to another Friday Tech Workshop. I'm Joseph, a senior developer advocate with Appsmith. And in this workshop, I'm going to show you how to use external libraries in your app to add extra features like transforming or filtering data. You can use it to generate mock data or unique IDs. You can even take your data and merge that in with a template and generate a PDF. There's libraries for converting JSON to CSVs or Excel files. So there's all kinds of new features that you can add to your app by importing an external library. Let's go ahead and check out the first one, which is Moment.js for working with dates and timestamps. Okay, first we're going to check out Moment.js. This is a library for working with dates and timestamps and converting. It can do durations between different dates or timestamps, a bunch of other stuff. So we're going to use it to generate the current date and then a due date that is 30 days out. And I've got this Google Sheets API set up here, and I want to add a row to Google Sheets. We'll put in a name and an email address from another API. So I've got it set up to take the current row or the triggered row when a user clicks a button here, and we're going to save a row to Google Sheets. But instead of these dates being hard-coded here, I want to actually get the current date and then a date 30 days out. So for this, we can use the Moment.js library. And if you just use moment like this, the function without any parameters or any other methods chained on, it gives you back a timestamp. And it's even got like decimal seconds here. So we only want the date. It's not in the right format. And so moment has a format option here. Dot format. And then inside of this one, if you don't give it any parameters, it's still coming back as a timestamp. But now it's got the offset here for the time zone. So the format that I want would be just like this, the 4-digit year, month, and then day. And so in Moment, there is a format for that. In the string here, you give it a string with a template kind of what you want. They call this tokens. So there's a token for the month or the day. And if you want it to be like abbreviated or the full month, there's tons of different options. So if you check out the docs for Moment, we can look at that right here. Moment is one of the libraries that's included by default, and there's a link for the docs here. And there's a ton of different options. So let's check out format, string formats, and you give that dot format a string with one of these types of formats. You can use these placeholders for month or day or week or quarter. There's tons of them. And there's also ones for like converting between different ones or finding that duration. So tons of different options in here. What we are going to do is use it to get that due date. So I'm going to copy this and we'll put the same date here, but we want to add 30 days to it. And so right here, there's moment.add. And this takes two parameters, an amount of some units. So the first one would be the amount. We want to add 30. And then the thing that we're adding, the units, is days. So if you check this out now, I'm getting back the current date here and a date that's 30 days out, but now it's dynamically generating it. So every time a user runs this API, it will calculate those dates on the fly and give us the current date and then that formatted date 30 days out. You can also use this to subtract. So you would put a negative number here. It doesn't actually have a dot subtract or a minus function. You just use the dot add and then make that negative. So tons of different use cases. This is the most common though, just pre-filling a value with a date or some offset like that. So next we're going to check out UUID.js. This is a library for generating IDs like this. I have this one just as a placeholder. And what I really want is a full UUID like this. So we'll use this to generate one and then take the name and the email address from that record. And then we're generating these two dates and we'll generate the ID. So right here, we're going to use that UUID.js, but that one is not installed. It is in the recommended libraries. So here you've got a list of the ones that are currently installed. You'll have Lodash, Moment, and Forge to begin with. All Appsmith apps have those by default. And then I've added a few others here, and I also want to add UUID.js. So here it is. It's one click to just install any one of these libraries, and then it says it's available as UUID. So the library name itself has the JS, but each one of these has something in here that'll tell you the way that you reference it in the code, its actual like name in the editor. So here we'll use UUID to call up this library. And if I go right back here, so there it is. And then inside of this, there's a bunch of different functions and options and objects. We're going to use this gen v4. And this generates a UUID object that has other properties in it that we don't need. I only want to get this hex string. So I'm going to copy that property name and just use the dot notation here to go in a level and get just that ID. So now we're getting a v4 UUID, and it's going to generate it on the fly right before this API runs for each user. So that is Moment.js, which is installed by default, and then UUID that we just added. Next, we're going to check out Lodash. This is another library that's installed by default, and this does all kinds of stuff for data transformations and filters. So let's look at this example. And I've got the same API set up. It's mock data with 100 results. And each one of these users has a date of birth object. Let's see, collapse all this stuff. And there is a date of birth, which has the timestamp, and it also has a .age. So if I wanted to get the average age of everyone in this data set, I'd have to write some JavaScript to loop over it and pull out this age and maybe put it in an array first and then total the array. Or I could add them on the fly and keep a tally, like a running total going, and then divide at the end. But either way, you're going to have several lines of code just to loop through the data and get the total and then divide by the length. So with Lodash, there's tons of different methods that do all kinds of data transformation and filter stuff. I'm just going to show a couple quick examples. So right here in the JS object, first, I'm just getting the length of the data. I'm not using Lodash yet. But let's say we wanted to see how many records are there. Okay, so the data has 100 records. If we wanted to know the average age, we'd have to get the total first and then divide by that length. Now, I could write a loop and go through and get all of that first, but we want some value that's going to go right here and then divide by it, right? So right here we can use Lodash, which is underscore. So you use underscore dot, and then there's all of these methods in Lodash. One of those methods is sum by. So the sum by method here, go to the docs link. Oops. Here we go. So that's sum by. Here it is. It takes an array and then something that you want to do with each one of those. And that can either be a function, so you can pass it the data, the list of objects, and a function to run on each one, or you can just give it the property name. So the thing that you want to sum in that data set. And it doesn't actually have to be a function, it's just the name of the property. So we are going to use that to sum by. And we want to take in this data and then sum it by, and it's the date of birth dot age. And so there it is. We have average age of 49.61 in this full data set here. If I remove this length that we're dividing by, we can see that it's totaling up by the age column. And it's actually working with a nested path too. This would be multiple lines of JavaScript. I mean, you could maybe chain a bunch of things together and make it a one-liner, but there's multiple steps to this, and Lodash makes it really easy, and it's actually doing a lot more than just a total, because if one of the properties was missing, if one of the rows didn't have a date of birth dot age, your simplest form of the code, it's probably going to have an error and, no error checking. So it's going to fail on certain records. And then you'd have to add some more logic to your code for that. This makes it just as easy as saying, give me the sum from this field, and it handles all those edge cases. If the data is missing, if something's, a string instead of a number, things like that, that would probably cause your code to have an error or make you have to add all those extra exceptions and checks. So this is just a really easy way to get the average. And then it does not actually have a function for average. I had to use the sum first and then divide by the length. So it does have a lot of options in there, but the average one, I think it's forcing you to decide the length. Because like, what if some of them are 0? You want to skip those and say the length is, X number shorter, or do you count the 0? So I think there's just so many options there when it comes to how you average it. But the total is total regardless. So that is Lodash. There's a ton of other options. Group by is another one. This, let me show it really quick. I'm not going to demo a full use case of this, but just to kind of show you some of the power that you can do with Lodash. So there's this group by option, and it'll take some data and then group it by a certain field. What would be a field that has a repeating value here? Could group it by their country. Okay, so it looks like there's an undefined set. Oh, that's right. It calls it nationality, I think. Country is inside of the address. I'm looking for the top level property. ID, picture, nat. There we go. So I was just going for a property that's got like a fixed list of values so we can group by it. So let's use that one, nat, for nationality. Here we go. We have an object that has a NL property for New Zealand here. And then that's an array. It's filtered all of the users that are in that country. Okay, there's a user. Here's one. And then that's all of the NL. And then here's the next country, and it's an array. That would take a decent amount of JavaScript, and especially if there's undefined values again. So tons of cool use cases. This particular one, group by, it can be really handy with charting. So if you want to make a different line series for each value. So that's Lodash. Again, that one is included by default. Going back to that method that we just did to sum by, because my next example kind of ties into this. Age, there we go. So there's the total of their ages, and the data length would give us the average. All right, so with this particular data set, it's a random set of 100 users, but it's saying that their average age right now is 49.61. So that is really easy to do with Lodash, but it is it may not be familiar if you're used to using SQL, right? Like you could do the average, just say column name, give me the average. And that syntax, that SQL syntax, normally you can't use it in JavaScript. The next library, this is a really cool one. Oscar from the community just pointed this out last week. And so I was checking out this library. It's Alla SQL. And it's great for stuff like this. It lets you filter data and run queries on it and transform data, rename columns just like you would in SQL, but using JavaScript. So same data set here. I've got my random API. And on this one, we're going to use Alla SQL to do pretty much the same thing. We'll get the average from that one column. But before we get to that, a few other things I want to show with the syntax, and we'll build up to that. The way that this library works is you give it a query string, and you use a question mark as a placeholder for the things that you want to pass in that are dynamic. So I've defined my query string here, And the question mark is from what table? That's our data here from the API. And so with this function, I take alla SQL. I just installed this library, and so I showed how to install one a minute ago from the suggested list. This one is not in that recommended library list. This one I got from JS Deliver, and you just copy the URL itself here. There's the ESM version or the default min.js. You can try either one, but I think I used the min.js this time and copied the URL. And then you paste that in here. And so I was able to import that alla SQL library, and now it's available as alla SQL. So I'm passing it the query string and then an array. The array is all of the values that you want to substitute for the question marks here, and there's only the one for the data. So if I run this, it's going over that full data set with all the different properties, and it's pulling out just the email addresses. You could do the same thing with, just a line or two of JavaScript, but as your SQL query gets more complex, the equivalent JavaScript would be way more. This is really easy to just give it a string in that familiar SQL format, and then filter and transform JavaScript or JSON data that you normally wouldn't be able to do when it's on the client side in JSON format. Normally you'd want to do this as SQL on the server side, but if you're working with an API and it doesn't have those functions for average or whatever. So the next thing I want to show here is nested paths. So this data has a nested name object. It's like name.first, name.last. So let's try getting the name.first. Okay, it says it can't read property first. Now, I first found this library, thought it was pretty cool, but then I tried this and I'm like, well, it doesn't do nested paths, but that's still pretty cool and useful, right? It actually does do nested paths, but the format's weird, and it wasn't the first or the second or third thing I tried. The other option would be like the bracket notation. None of that stuff was working, but I checked the docs, and this is how they use the nested path. You have to give it this little arrow saying that you're going inside the object to get the next level, the next property here. So this is getting just the first name, but now it's calling it name arrow first. So it works. It's able to get the nested path, but you probably don't want your data with that type of character in the column name. So then you can use other SQL here in the query string and rename stuff. We can say select it as name. So there we go. We have just the first name now, and it's renaming it as name, and it's not nested. So now let's actually use this to get that average like we were talking about. Wanted to kind of build up to that and show some of the other simpler use cases here. So next what we'll do, we want to get the date of birth column, and that has an age in it. So there's all of the ages, and we can actually wrap this with a sum or average. With Lodash, we had to get the sum first and then divide by the length. But in this library, which works like SQL, you can do the average directly. And so you can see that we're pretty much in the same range. The other one was 41. This is a mock API, and it's random each time. So if I run this again, we get back different users. And if I run this average again, we're getting back a slightly different number, but the data set's pretty consistent, even though it's average. So this is an awesome way to filter and transform data without needing any JavaScript. I mean, you're just writing kind of a wrapper function, but it's alla SQL. You give it a query string and then an array with all of these question marks that you're replacing. Probably just the data, but you could pass in some other variables here as well. Okay, let's see. What is the next library we want to check out? Last one here is validator.js. So this one is really cool as well. It's got a bunch of different use cases, but it's mainly for forms. You would probably want to validate that data as the user is typing instead of saving it to the back end and then checking it there, right? So what this will let you do is validate user input on the front end, and it has tons of different data types. It can check, emails and addresses, credit card numbers, just to make sure it's the expected format. So right here on this form, if I want to make sure that this input email here is correct, we can go to the email section here, and for the valid, right here, there's a regex validation, which you could try to do a regex for email, but then trying to make sure that it supports subdomains or dot in the email, dashes. Google allows pluses in the username. And then there's all the different countries, right? I mean, you could try with regex, but somebody's going to have an email that doesn't work with yours. So this will let you do it way easier with just a function that checks it. And it might not be perfect. Maybe it'll have one that doesn't work too, but it's pretty accurate and it's way less work. So with this library, validator, I've already installed this one, so there it's available, and it's already there in the autocomplete. And it's got all of these Boolean functions. It takes in a value and it checks if it is base64 or ASCII or data URL. Is it a decimal? Is it an email? Here's the one I'm looking for. So I want to check if the value in this form right here for the email, if it's a valid email. And so we can pass in JSON form. JSON form 1 dot. So this has form data and source data. Source data is what pre-populated the form, but it could have changed. The user can override that and type into it. So we want to look at the form data dot email. And so this is returning true because there is a valid email here. If I take out the .com there, you see that now it's showing me that it's invalid. So I tried a few other values, just playing around with this to see how accurate it is. Like other, countries and formats, there's .co is valid, but then so is like .co.uk, for other countries. And so now it's back to being valid again. So you would have to do a lot of programming to get something that was that accurate. This is, keep dragging that. I should probably go to present mode here. But yeah, this is checking that each piece of it's there. So if there's nothing before the at, that's invalid. If you don't have the at symbol, right? And that much of it's easy, but then it gets tricky here at the end because there's so many different subdomains and dots and whatever. But it's as easy as just saying, is this a valid email now? And again, same thing with like credit card formats and all kinds of other stuff. So we'll look at the docs for that real quick. This one, again, I've already installed it. Oh, this one doesn't give you a doc link. Most of them have that right there. So this is one I installed. And here it is. So just copy that min.js link there, and then you can install this. And there are tons of different options for the formats that it can validate. I thought there was maybe another link here for their docs. Well, they show most of them here, actually. So here's all the different tests that it can do, and most of them, they return true or false. You're just passing in some string or a number or whatever, and it'll tell you if it is that format. And then some of them have options like this, like for locale. This one will tell you if it's like, floats, decimals. We use like a period here and then comma in other countries and things like that. So there's some of them have a locale to make sure that it's the right format for that region. So yeah, there are tons and tons of different libraries that are supported. Quick note though, on the ones that are not supported, the ones that you will not be able to import, if you try to import a library and it says it's unsupported, there's several that are blocked for security reasons because these can be used anywhere in the editor and they can read all the properties of your app. And certain libraries that can manipulate the DOM or the window object, that would be the entire app and the logic and the queries and everything that not every user should have access to. So The libraries that do work tend to be the ones that are just about manipulating data, generating things like a PDF. I'm not going to cover JS PDF today because I have a separate video just on that that's coming out. Okay, so I think that's it for this week. We covered quite a few different libraries that you can use in Appsmith anywhere in the editor. These libraries, when you import them from here, you can use it in the JS editor or an API. You can use it in the widget properties here, like we did for validating the email. So there's a ton of options there for the libraries that you can import at the app level. Just remember that there are certain ones that are not going to work because of security, because we block access to the DOM and to the window object, just so that those libraries can't read too much and change the logic of your app or expose data. So for those types of libraries, if you find one that is not able to import from right here, if you have something that's more UI focused that does need that window or DOM access, then you can run those libraries in a custom widget. That isolates the code, and the library is only in that custom widget, so it has full window access to that iframe. Basically, it's isolating that custom widget so that it can safely run those other libraries. So just about any library should work here. If there's one that doesn't import here, chances are it's a UI type thing that should be in a custom widget anyway, but it should work with just about any library in one of those two. So if you have a specific use case, a certain library that you're not able to get working in either at the app level or in a custom widget, feel free to drop a comment below, reach out on Discord. I'd love to hear about your use case and what library you're trying to use, and maybe we can get a demo set up and working for you. So I hope this has been helpful. That is it for this week, and we will be doing more on external libraries. I've got a few particular ones where I want to do more focused session just on that one thing. But this has been more just kind of a primer to show you what's possible and how to use the built-in libraries, how to import one. So thanks again for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you next week.